All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's a great day for leadership in our city as we have confirmed the following new members to my cabinet. Sandra Blakemore, Commissioner, the Department of Human Resources, a proven executive who will continue DHR's mission of fair, equitable, and transparent employment practices. Tom Carney and his entire family, they roll deep. Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Transportation, a longtime CDOT employee in several roles, including First Deputy Commissioner. And then, of course, Mrs. Hernandez Tomlin, Commissioner of the Department of Fleet and Facility Management, who brings nearly 2 decades of experience of working with the city in her position at 2FM. And last but not least, the most famous Cubs fan now in the history of Chicago, Jose Tirado, Executive Director of the Office of Emergency Management and Communications, whose deep expertise and commitment to our city is well documented. He will continue to modernize OMC and ensure that our city is ready to respond to all of our residents' needs. Congratulations to all of them. I'm extremely proud to work with each of you to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago. So please just indulge me. Let's give them a nice, warm round of applause. Also today, City Council, we honored and celebrated Women's History Month, a month where we recognize the contributions and achievements of women who have built and shaped this great city that we live in today. And throughout the month of March and beyond, I'm committed to uplifting the accomplishments and the enduring impact of women in our world. I also want to take this moment especially to recognize all of the women who lead and work for the city of Chicago. Thank you. My deputy mayors of labor, education, infrastructure, policy, immigration, migrant and refugee rights, business, economic development, my deputy chief of staff, to the budget director, IGA director, and every woman who is in my administration, all the women who serve the city council, our women who are serving as commissioners, the policy, all of these women ensure that the greatest city in the world can grow and thrive, and we can do that with love and compassion. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And with that, I'll take questions.
Hi, Mayor, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, thank you.
I wanted to ask you what I hope is a quick question before I get to my question. Have you gotten a readout from the FOP hearing today?
I have not.
All right, thank you. Lots to talk about with Bring Chicago Home. It looks like it's headed for defeat. Let me ask it this way. A year ago, it looked like your coalition was unstoppable based on your win in the election. Then 6 months ago, it looked like you were strong based on your early city council legislative victories. But today, you woke up with cracked armor. Do you need to slow down or reset, whether in substance or style?
I really love the commentating, by the way. So first of all the results are, the votes have not been counted. So that has not been declared just yet. You know, look, there are 68,000 people who are unhoused. That's the focus. 1 in 4 black children will experience homelessness in the city of Chicago throughout their education career. That's the primary focus here. That's the issue that we have to solve. And, you know, no one said it was going to be easy, you know, but the fact of the matter is in this moment that you have, you know, a very low turnout. It's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we are engaging the people of Chicago in a way that maximizes the fullness of democracy. You know, so you know the $250 million that I've dedicated to the unhoused, a brand new chief homelessness officer. The last I checked, though, that the people of Chicago are still very much committed to addressing and solving this issue. So, very much committed. The fight still goes on.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Given how integral Bring Chicago Home has been to your mayoral agenda, should the referendum's outcome, whatever it is, also be a referendum on your administration and the progressive movement taking charge?
All right, so we have abolished sub-minimum wage. We are the largest space right now where paid time off is available to so many people. Treatment, not trauma, opening up mental health clinics. Again, $250 million into the unhoused, $100 million of violence prevention, making sure that we actually have an fully elected representative school board. The progressive agenda is not dedicated to one issue. This is the unique thing about running an entire city of Chicago. You get to address everything. And we're doing that. We're doing that. We're still strong.
And to follow up on that, if it loses, what's next? Will you go to Springfield? Will you try again in November?
We're going to keep organizing. No, we're going to keep organizing. Look, you all know who I am, right? We're going to keep organizing. Again, the results are not in, but I can tell you this, though, where this issue is, where the greatest impact of those who are experiencing being unhoused, there are a lot more yeses there. A lot more yeses. So, we have to continue to organize to make sure that we're bringing our neighbors along who may not be as impacted by this issue. But, to be the mayor of the city of Chicago, where I once upon a time took an arrest at the very elevators that now are held for me. This is the greatest city in the world. There's not a fight that we have not taken on that we won't have the ability to win. And that's the important thing here. And the progressive agenda, again, from dealing with mental health, dealing with education, dealing with workers, that progressive agenda is expansive, as it should be. 40 plus years, decades of disinvestment. And I'm grateful that we have a lot of people who are committed to seeing the transformation that propelled me into office.
Afternoon, Mayor. Yesterday's election, there were 3 ballot referendums, the 13th, 23rd, and 36th Ward, where voters overwhelmingly voted to call on the city to reopen additional police districts in response to lagging response times. Is that something that you are open to, adding additional police districts, especially in the 12th and 8th district that have seen really expansive police districts and had trouble getting people to 911 calls promptly?
Well, there's been a lot of cuts over the course of decades in this city, as you know, from closing of schools, public housing, mental health clinics. Our approach to public safety is holistic. And so, my deputy mayor for community safety is here. Our approach is comprehensive. And policing is just one tool in the toolbox to address public safety in this city. So, I'm willing to sit down with individuals in those particular precincts and to have further conversations about what it means to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago.
Hi, Mayor. Last week, the Chicago Sun-Times reported on multiple archdiocese properties that supposedly they were offering up for free, but they did not hear back from your office. Can you tell me, is the city considering those over the properties that the city's renting for, in some cases, over market rate?
Well, first of all, it's inaccurate. So there have been a number of archdiocese buildings that have not been suitable for this mission. I can tell you that. And we're working with the archdiocese to bring one online. There's a whole lot that goes into opening up a shelter, and I can tell you I've become an expert at it. We were opening up shelters once a week when I was first sworn in. So I'm grateful that we have a partnership with the archdiocese, but it's not just as simple as here's a building, take it. There's work that has to be done to build it out, to make it suitable for shelter. So it's not entirely accurate of how it's being portrayed, that essentially there are a lot of people who have offered up buildings, right? But it doesn't mean they were suitable for this mission.
So
And they weren't necessarily even offered up entirely for free. In fact, part of the agreement initially was it was not offered up as free. There were later conversations that there would be some flexibility with the first 6 months, but not, in perpetuity. So we are still working with the archdiocese, and I'm grateful for the leadership of Cardinal Cupich, who has been a part of these conversations as well.
I can confirm you're considering one, but no more.
Right now, there is one that is close to being put online. There are considerations for lots of buildings, but again, the building has to be suitable to be able to meet the needs of this mission.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the settlements that were approved today by the City Council. $45 million for an unauthorized police chase, $5 million on top of the $55 million that's already spent on the Guevara case. What does this say about the police department and what work still needs to be done when it comes to the constitutional policing that you've been trying to address?
Well, one of the things that Superintendent Stelling and I speak about regularly is the type of training that we have to make available for officers who are coming into the force. And I'm grateful that there are scores and scores of officers who have gone through this training, many of whom have been trained by Superintendent Snelling, and we're seeing better practices. Still a lot of work to be done, no doubt about that. It also speaks to just the decades of negligence. Some of these things, as you know, predate my existence, right? They go back to a time before I was even born. So there's a lot of time that has elapsed over the course of decades now where this has become an erosion. And working with our new superintendent, who I have confidence in, to not only provide training for our officers to ensure that constitutional policing is the prevailing form of governance, but also making sure that we are responding to emergencies in a holistic way. There are certain instances where law enforcement is showing up and it's not a law enforcement response. That's why I'm committed to growing our treatment, not trauma, operation and working with advocates so that we can have mental health providers that are showing up to scenes where mental health professionals are a better response to the crisis.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
The Civic Federation said last week that they didn't believe that voters had enough information on Bring Chicago Home to make an informed decision one way or the other. So that being said, if this referendum question does continue in some fashion, do you think that progressives ought to present or make a better case to voters about how that money will be used? And do you think that they made the best case to voters this time around?
Look, I think political engagement is something that we all should participate and engage in. I don't know if that should be confined to progressives, by the way. And I like them, by the way. I like progressives a lot. But I would not put the responsibility on educating voters solely on progressives. All of us have to participate in this democratic process to ensure that the people who count on us to deliver high-quality services for them, that they know exactly what they're getting. And what I've said from day one, from the time that I announced my candidacy to the time that I was sworn in, that the best thing that we can do for the people of Chicago is to invest in them, to invest in people. I don't know how many more conversations are required in different parts of the city to make sure that becomes ingrained into the ecosystem of politics. But the safest communities in the world invest in people. We have 68,000 people who are unhoused. The vast majority of them are black people. We put forth a measure to address that. We did. Now, as far as the forces who may not have the same amount of urgency, the people who are impacted, we got to do a better job to help them understand as well. Because you all know my personal story. I had an older brother who had untreated trauma and died addicted and unhoused. That's what we are working to solve for. And so that work continues, and I'm very much motivated to continue to do that.
Mayor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Many who've stood at your podium have talked about how elections have consequences, and I want to ask you one more question about Bring Chicago Home. Some of your critics have said this is certainly a signal that this is a pump the brakes moment on the mayor's agenda. Would you agree with that? How would you frame it?
I believe that the 68,000 people in this city who are unhoused deserve a champion, and they got one. They do. But this is not something that gets solved by one person. All right, I'm going to do it, okay? Because I'm going to be especially vulnerable here. You all know how the rules were played out in this particular ballot referendum, and I work within the confines of those rules. Now, there's to date, my record of being able to compel and campaign and convince, there were some limitations to how I can engage in this moment. That was frustrating, but make no mistake about it. If anyone believes that one issue that we still have to address is going to cause me to put the brakes on my agenda, well, they missed the city council today, because we are moving forward with the $1.25 billion bonds deal that's going to invest in people, because that's what I promised that I was going to do, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what I will continue to do. So guess what? Buckle up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I was wondering if you could put on your organizer hat for a moment as a former organizer and talk about, with regard to Bring Chicago Home, when a defeat like this is suffered, how does the movement pivot? It's, you've suffered defeats before as an organizer. What's the pivot here, and how does the organizing change moving forward?
Well, the organizing is something that really is an integral part of the history of Chicago. I'm not the only executive to serve as an organizer. Now, there is an ongoing debate on whether or not President Obama and myself, who was the better organizer, but we'll leave that for another conversation. But since we're quoting famous people, there's a very famous person, I'll let you look him up, but it talks about people who either attack or critique from the sideline, individuals who have never participated in a game. So they don't know the difference between winning or being defeated because they never participated. The amount of loss that we've experienced in this city, 350,000 black people who have been displaced in this city over the course since 1980. Brown people who are being priced out of their communities. The organizing doesn't pivot. The organizing gets stronger. Because the same organizing that had to deal with the loss of schools, housing, mental health clinics, jobs, that's the same organizing that propelled me into this office. We get stronger. And whatever we didn't get the first time, we'll get even more the next time.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I'm Michael Liptrot with Southside Weekly.
You knew, have I seen you before?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's your name?
Michael Liptrot. We met at a WBEZ forum.
I see. Okay, well, that was a big room. I'm talking about like one-on-one. Okay, it's good to see you again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As mentioned with the question earlier, today the city of Chicago passed a resolution toward the largest police settlement in history. And in your response, you mentioned trainings. Can you be more specific on these trainings, and how will these trainings prevent such tragedies in the future?
Well, first of all, it is a tragedy. It is. This particular officer was engaged in an act that is not permitted. And the breadth of training that we have available, it's everything from responding to crises to responding to outbreaks, or when people are demonstrating and expressing their First Amendment right. Trainings in how we engage in a culturally competent way. In fact, the last graduation, I'm sorry you missed it. I can't remember the officer's name now. It'll come back to me. But she talked about how there was a situation where there was an emergency and a brother was having a tough time in that moment. And there were other officers who were not demonstrating the type of sensitivity and cultural competence that was needed in that moment. And she stepped in and provided that. It's trainings like that we have to make sure that people know that the communities in which they're serving in, that there are dynamics that translate differently. It's not that much different than how we train educators. Like there has to be an appreciation, quite frankly, for the level of mistrust that exists in certain communities, and understanding and being empathetic. And so I'm happy to make sure that the superintendent, provides you, if you want some specifics around how long those trainings are, how many people are signing up, how many folks have been trained, we can get that to you. Thank you.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
Wanted to go back to the migrant shelters just for a moment. The city's website does provide an overview of how hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on the migrant mission thus far. But what it doesn't do is give the people of Chicago a more detailed view of where those dollars have flowed in terms of who financially benefits from those buildings. We've spent months trying to ask for lease agreements and been told in some cases the city doesn't have them because of the way it's structured with third-party organizations. Would you be in support of additional calls for more transparency, more sharing of documents on the city's website so that people know where millions of dollars have flowed, who's financially benefited from this?
Commissioner Kanazi is here. She can speak to some of the lease agreements. Again, from the very beginning of this mission, I've been open and transparent about how dollars are being appropriated. I have been. The previous city council punted $51 million was one of my first acts. I actually expressed breaking news from Mayor Brandon Johnson, $47 million went to one particular entity, of which we renegotiated that, along with food contracts, with staffing. So, as far as some of the specifics pertaining to these buildings, we'll turn it over to the commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. So
Good afternoon.
there's a couple ways that we go. One, we look to see what city assets that we have that we can leverage, and we try to do that. You've seen us do that with former school buildings, with Wadsworth, as well as for, Park District, locations that we use. Second way is direct leases, and so we'll do that with the Office of Emergency Management and Communication. They work with AIS and are able to sign leases. And then the third way that we leverage leases is with Equitable Social Solutions. So have a contract that allows us to support our homeless population where we're able to lease spaces, and so we leverage that for the New Arrivals mission. And so from there, we're able to work with them, and they're able to work with the party that's able to go into spaces that we necessarily can't go into in order to lease. And so that's where a number of those leases are. So I think, it's a lot about just trying to really figure out, one, large spaces. The mayor talked about spaces have to be large enough to hold, a couple hundred people. We have to have dining spaces. It has to have, bathrooms and such like that. But those are where those leases are. And I think, we'll continue to, really put forth. I think what's important to know is that this is a massive mission. The city of Chicago, we support, our homeless population for homeless shelters, but we don't directly operate. In this particular mission, we are managing over 11,000 beds. At the height, we were at 15,000. So I think it's just, you're meeting us where we are as we're really just trying to really wrap our head around and really stabilize the mission to go forward.
It's just one follow-up real quick. It's just that last way, though, it kind of shrouds the transfer, creates a shroud of secrecy, though, because we don't know how much the person who's the landlord of that building gets per month. I mean, we've seen with bed rates, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. I mean, I guess that's still the question that's outstanding. Would you support more transparency, more efforts to share those records?
Thank you for that question. Again, we're meeting you right where you are. Thank you.
Hi, Mayor. Could we revisit a different campaign, and that's the Cook County State's Attorney race? Do you see, depending on what happens, we don't know, it's still up in the air, but does it send a message that maybe voters want to shift a little bit from progressive ideals and how public safety is approached, the way San Francisco and Washington, for example, kind of pivoted recently? Do you get the message maybe that voters are more concerned about safety and want to tighten up on law enforcement? Is that the message you might get from the campaign?
Look, I mean, communities like mine that have been, impacted by violence, that we're not shifting in any one direction or the other. We just want better, stronger, safer communities. Unfortunately, violence in neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested in, violence is not new. I don't know if you were able to participate in our second phase of our community safety plan, but neighborhoods like Garfield Park, Austin, Inglewood, Roseland, Little Village. These are communities that have just suffered some of the greatest tragedies. And you want a system that holds people accountable, and you also want a system that understands justice. Because we know the history of state's attorneys in this region. The gentleman asked questions about settlements. The current state's attorney had to exonerate over 100 black men who were forced into confessions. So I understand your question. I do. And it's incumbent upon all of us as elected officials, whether you're a state's attorney, a mayor, a county commissioner, an alder, state rep, that we got to create conditions that eliminate the proclivity of crime. Because if we don't do that, then reverting back to the 90s where remember, there were more murders in the 90s, but there were also more people in jail and incarcerated. In the history of the world, I mean, at one point, I think there was a study that showed how there were more people incarcerated than were enslaved at the end of slavery. So I believe what voters want is what they always want. They want to make sure that there's real justice, but they also want to make sure that there's accountability. And that's something that I'm fighting for.
So do you support that $300 level for retail theft or the $1,000 level that...
I support justice and accountability.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Mayor, if you'll indulge me, a question for my colleague who's working on the lead pipe story. Can you respond to this recent report that shows thousands of kids in Chicago are drinking lead pipe water, if you will?
Well, the water in Chicago is safe by all standards. From the Environment Protection Agency, our standards are exceeding the federal standards. What we do have, of course, is a problem with lead pipes. Grateful for the investments that are coming from the federal government to help us address this issue. My chief operations officer, we're working to replace about how many? 100? 5,000 over the next 12, so the next year. So that work is still ongoing. And again, our water standards exceed even the federal guidelines.
And I want to go back to your favorite topic of the day, Bring Chicago Home. Do you think that in selling this idea behind the referendum might have had more success if you would have specified going into this election how you were going to spend the money instead of leaving it out there as this generic use, we'll figure it out later idea?
Sure. Look, I appreciate the question. I don't know if I would characterize it as we'll figure it out later. What the process required was far more democratic than what I think has been accustomed in this city, and that it wasn't just enough to pass this referendum to create a pathway for more revenue, that the second part of that process was to do just that through a community process. That's central to my style of leadership. It was important to me because that type of specificity is what has been longing. So we literally created a democratic structure to allow for that to happen. Now, as far as how we talked about this, the rules are what they are, but I was always clear from the time that, we passed this. We have 1 in 5 black children in particular who can experience homelessness. You got 68,000 people are on the house. Building more affordable housing, making sure that we have pathways to affordable rent in this city, multi-unit buildings. Again, where the neighborhoods who are most impacted by this issue, they knew exactly what they were voting for. That's why I don't believe it's a coincidence that where there are more yeses, it's where there's a greater concentration of those who are unhoused. So the question that I would ask is, the people who are most impacted understood the assignment. The question is, the people who were not as impacted, how do we make sure that they understand the assignment even if they're not impacted? Where the point of pain is where we should actually lead. And the people of Chicago, where that point of pain is quite potent, they're very clear about what this was about.
Mayor, you've referenced a few times now, kind of the constraints or the rules around this. Can you just describe a little more?
Yeah, I wanted to campaign more, man. Come on, man. I wanted to be out there. You all know I'm a gamer. I was polling at 2.2% in this city. Heck yeah, I wanted to be out there. That sucked when you're a gamer and you knock down shots and you can't be out on the court. Maybe we should use a football analogy, but I don't want to trigger any Justin Fields fans here. But I wanted the ball. Absolutely, I wanted the ball. That sucked.
I guess the follow-up to that, there's some, hey, the opponents tried to make this in part a referendum on you, right? In their campaign commercials and mailers, and you couldn't proactively defend yourself.
No, exactly. And quite frankly, I'm just going to be very direct, okay? He's good. He can ask another one. He's fine. because you asked a really good question here. It got me all fired up. It was cowardly. It's cowardly. Look, you can have your position, whatever it is. There are 68,000 people who are unhoused in this city. 70% of them are black. 1 in 4 black children are going to experience unhoused in this city. It was cowardly. But I'm still here, still standing, and I will be punching back. What's your other question?
Just, this was another revenue stream that it appears is not going to be available. Like, maybe this is a big picture. Can you deliver kind of the change that you came in promising within the city's current budget, without increasing the pie, so to speak, so that you can deliver investments without taking from other, things they're currently going to?
Good question, man. It's a very good question. Look, this bonds deal is certainly putting us it places us in a better position. We're talking $600 million plus to go towards housing. So all of our eggs were not in that basket. But we also have, another portion of this bonds deal that will allow for commercial and economic development. As far as, the big, bold agenda that I have, thank you for acknowledging it. Look, from paid time off to sub-minimum wage to treatment, not trauma, plowing the sidewalks, the investment in young people, a 20% increase. We added another $76 million on top of that. So we're going to hire almost 28,000 young people this summer. So I'm encouraging everyone who is 14, right? Between the ages of 14 to 24 to apply for these jobs. Like, we're getting it done. And we're doing it during very extreme, polarized politics right now, where you have the federal government that has left the city of Chicago and other small cities and other local municipalities to figure out an international crisis on their own. So, our agenda is substantial. And I'm proud of the work that we've done in less than a year. And I'm grateful that there's still more time on the clock to continue to move our agenda.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
This past Sunday, 34 migrants were scheduled to exit city shelters, with only 3 of them actually doing so that day, and an additional 5 taking place on Monday, according to your office. This morning, some pro-immigration organizations, as well as councilmen and other people, have met here to ask for you to reconsider the 60-day temporary shelter policy. Would you be willing to do so, or what's your approach moving forward?
Well, we're going to continue to collaborate with the state as well as the county government to continue to build this operation around the humanity of people. But the reality is that we have restraints. We just do. We've always had them. I've said this from the very beginning, that this mission is unsustainable. Local municipalities are not designed to deal with an international global crisis, particularly as it relates to migrants and asylum seekers. And it's never been designed to do that. What I've said to people repeatedly, help me find solutions to address this crisis. The fact of the matter is, we don't control what's going on at the border. And we got to keep in mind, that is the genesis of this crisis. How should I describe it? The iniquitous behavior of the governor is quite disturbing. So we're doing everything in our power. We're the only city in this country that has not put restraints. Other places like Massachusetts, 7,500 beds, that's it. Billions of dollars for the entire state. Denver, New York, DC, Philadelphia, all of these places. And I have no judgment against them. This is the decision that they made. They placed restraints. We have been open and quite accommodating during a very difficult moment in our nation's history. I'm proud of the work that our mutual aid folks are providing on the front lines, but this is unsustainable, absent significant federal intervention. Whatever I do for this crisis, absent investment from the federal government, it's not sustainable.
Could you also talk about how these numbers can fluctuate moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have control over the border. I mean, I think today, if I'm not mistaken, there are 4 buses that are being dropped off in the region. They're circumventing our structure here in the city of Chicago. taking advantage of other municipalities to put people on trains. They still don't know where they're going. Look, y'all, this is some sickening stuff right here. To just put people on buses and just say, good luck. That's real jacked up. That's the problem, is that we have the governor of Texas who needs to find a soul.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I want to shift a little bit from organizing to messaging, because is it going to be necessary to come up with a different kind of messaging? Because toward the end, the real estate industry basically was couching this as another tax increase and saying, do you trust Mayor Johnson with $100 million more of your money? That was their message at the end. And from the kind of interviews we were doing, that was resonating with people.
Yeah, it's another good question. Like I said, I'm grateful to the coalition. The story that, unfortunately was drowned out by those who, look, I don't know what's in their heart. I can just say that they were actively working against a measure that would raise revenue to address the homelessness crisis, of which 70% of the folks are black. The stories that got drowned out by those interests were the stories of the individual families who have suffered in this city because we have not had enough revenue to address this crisis. So it's organizing and messaging, again, I'm still very hopeful and charged to address this crisis, as well as other issues that we're faced with in this city. That even when we experience, moments like this, we don't ever quit. We don't quit on the people of Chicago. My administration is still very much committed to working with coalition and those who need to better understand what we're up against. We have to organize them as well. But here's the thing. Where we really have to organize are the communities who are most impacted. Because it's also not lost on me. I think there were 38,000 Republicans that showed up and voted for Donald Trump or something like that in Chicago. So, since if we're trying to draw some conclusions and you all want some other, analytics you might want to discover, that might be something to look into, because I'll just say it, there's a good chance that played a part in this referendum. So the same people who want to see Donald Trump to become president, sometimes I do feel like he wants my job, but who wants to be president again, those are the same voters who voted for him, and the same voters where you look at where there were more no's, they were concentrated there.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
I'll ask your indulgence for 2 questions, if you don't mind.
Don't mind. How y'all doing up here? 'Cause they said, all right, we're almost done, though.
The officer who launched the unauthorized pursuit that Nathan Jones has been sued 3 times, and the city has now paid a total of nearly $47 million to resolve his misconduct. He remains an active member of the Chicago Police Department, earning more than $100,000. How can you tell the people of Chicago that he is qualified to protect and serve?
Well, look, there is still a democratic process that exists. It's a tragedy, and people who serve and people who sign up to serve and protect have to adhere to that honor to be able to do that. And so the systems in place that grievances as well as acts of misconduct that are available, that process is one that is responsible for outcomes as it relates to those who are accused or charged with misconduct. So I know what my standard for policing is. That act is not my standard. And I'm going to continue to make sure that the superintendent works with my administration to ensure that we have people who truly believe in constitutional policing.
Speaking of Superintendent Snelling, he told the Chicago Police Board on February 22nd that he believes the Civilian Office of Police Accountability has treated his officers so fairly that it compromises public safety and compromises officer wellness and could, in fact, lead in officer suicides because of egregiously harsh penalties for those officers. COPA has found to sustain misconduct complaints against them. Do you agree with Superintendent Stelling on that?
Well, look, I'm not sure what he's entirely referring to, of which cases. That's something that, I appreciate his perspective. The question around officer wellness as a whole, one thing that we do agree on, that we do have some challenges there. There are a lot of more young people who are serving and protecting this city, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure that their mental health and their mental well-being is protected. But it also goes to why I'm a big proponent of treatment, not trauma, and mental health support services as a whole, so that we're not necessarily looking at one particular entity or body of government or appointed body as the sole as holder of one's mental health. But I do appreciate both of those questions.
Hey, Mayor.
Hey.
Turnout yesterday was so far much lower than it was in last year's primary and runoff. The electorate also got older. Where did the turnout energy from last year go when it came for Bring Chicago Home? And why do you think less people showed up?
Again, look, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we're engaging people. And, particularly with our young voters, it's an important note. As you all know, that I think we had 27,000 more young voters under the age of 34 that voted in April that did not vote in February. And I believe I won by 26,532 votes. So one could draw a conclusion that it's young people under the age of 34 that helped push me over the top. It's why I expressed, I think, your colleague pulled it out of me. I was trying my best to restrain myself, but there's something to be said about a mayor that has the ability to connect across generations. And I'm not saying that I'm the only person who can do that. What I am saying is that it's incumbent upon all of us to work within communities to draw that response, and just know that I'm going to continue to do my part to make sure that young voters stay engaged.
Do you think that the lack of turnout, and especially among young voters, has anything to do with who's running on the presidential ticket and the non-competitive nature of those races? And also, sorry, I don't mean to ask too many questions.
That's okay, Jake. You've learned pretty quickly around here.
I got extra ones. But do you think it has anything to do with the presidential election? And do you regret this referendum coming up in March and not in November?
No, I don't have any regrets, man. I don't behave like that. Someone who comes, and if you look at this entire stage, these are people who have endured. Tom Carney, it took a while, didn't it? You have people who have endured so much in this city. We don't regret decisions. Not when it comes to addressing this issue. As far as, the presidential and the impact there, I'm going to leave that to you all as pundits. Perhaps maybe over coffee we can chit chat and talk about electoral politics and presidential primaries.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
The three-tiered structure for the Bring Chicago Home question was unveiled under your administration. Would a simpler question, like one that only asked for a tax increase and not these tiers and a tax cut, do you think that would have been easier for voters to understand and make it less susceptible to potential legal challenges?
So there were earlier questions about just voter education. And, in our attempt to be as perspective and prescriptive as possible, got a little assist there, prescriptive as possible, because people want information. As far as, again, how we Wednesday morning quarterback this, give us more time to think that through. But, again, the goal was to make sure that people were fully informed of what they were voting on.
And, if increasing the real estate transfer tax ends up not being politically viable with voters, what other avenues are you looking toward? You mentioned your bond plan as one route, but does the potential defeat of Bring Chicago Home bring a property tax increase back on the table for you for the coming years?
Well, what I'll say is this, is that, we've already dedicated $250 million to homelessness. We got a chief homelessness officer that's coming in. We have a chief philanthropic officer that is helping us make stronger connections. There are good conversations that we're having with the federal government, the outgoing secretary of HUD. We've had some good conversations about other opportunities that are available for us. Again, this was just one avenue, for us. The good news is that you have an administration that is made up of an incredible, diverse group of people who have been part of movement and coalition building. So we're going to continue to explore as many options as possible. As you all know, we've dedicated an entire subcommittee to find revenue ideas. What we have to solve for is the fact that we have 68,000 people who are unhoused. We have unemployment rates, and our Deputy Mayor Garen Gatewood spoke to this last week. We have unemployment rates that are 3 times the amount of the city's averages. I get that right? Yeah. And they're mostly black, brown communities. For every $1 a white family earns in Chicago, a brown family earns 8 cents, a black family earns 1 cent. So when we talk about this progressive agenda, and should we slow it down? Not for the families who are suffering in abject poverty. So, look, I'm up for it. None of us got here because someone made an easy pathway for us. The hard route, that is just life for us. And so you have people who are dedicated to making sure that people who are living hard lives, that we find ways to make it a little bit easier for them. And that the forces who are getting in the way of that, we're not done. We're not done. Justice is going to prevail.
Hi, Mayor. Just a quick follow-up to that, and then I have a question. So does the potential defeat put a property tax increase back on the table for you?
We have not discussed anything about property taxes.
Okay.
I have not brought that up at all.
Sure. And I'm wondering, did you ever discuss with Governor J.B. Pritzker or Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle an endorsement of Bring Chicago Home, and do you think that would have made a difference in terms of where we're at now?
Again, the rules and the dynamics that restrained my ability to engage were frustrating. This was a part of a larger coalition, and I trust those families who have dedicated their lives to justice in this city. And so the work that we have put forward up until this moment and the work that we will continue to do will still be centered around those families.
And so did you I take it as no, you didn't discuss an endorsement with those two?
I did not. All right, have a great day, you all.